Good morning, everyone from Singapore, and welcome to today's session on scaling innovations, corporate and startup collaboration. My name is Wei Min from SG Innovate, and for those who may know, we are a government-backed deep tech investor and company builder whose mission is to help entrepreneurial scientists build deep tech startups that are looking to solve big global problems. Our work also involves building a global community of leaders, thinkers, and doers to drive and scale up deep tech innovations in areas such as AI, healthcare, quantum tech, and autonomous technology across various industries. Today, we are very happy to be presenting this webinar co-organized with ADB Dutch Chem in exploring how corporates and startups can leverage on each other's strengths and assets for business growth. In the current world, where more and more unknowns are challenging businesses every day, there's a greater need to explore these collaborations for innovation that enable corporates and startups to develop a sustainable mean of business model to face whatever challenges that may come in their way. We encourage for all attendees to share with us your thoughts on the topic or interact with our speakers by posting your questions in the Q&A tab located at the bottom panel of your screen. Otherwise, feel free to just say hi or do a quick shout out from where you are in the chat box below. With no further ado, do allow me to pass the time to Hannah to share more about ADB Dutch Chem before going to our discussion for the day. Hannah, please.
Thank you, Waimin. Very good morning from on behalf of ADB Dutch Chem, the Dutch Chamber of Commerce here in Singapore. My name is Hannah Oleihoek, and I work as the community manager for our chamber. ADB Dutch Chem is a leading and recognized organization, and we connect the Dutch business community here in Singapore. We provide a strong platform for our members to share and showcase their knowledge, skills, values, and expertise. If you live and work in Singapore and you would like to be part of the Dutch Singaporean business community and have that connection with the Netherlands, being a member of our chamber is your ticket to the broader business network. I'm proud to share that two of our valued members, both Philips and AkzoNobel, are joining our session here today, and I'm curious to listen to our speakers in the upcoming 60 minutes. With this short introduction from my side, I would like to hand over to our moderator for today, Kelly Chen. Kelly is the Senior Manager of Venture Investing for SG Innovate. And Kelly, with that, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Hannah. So hi, everyone. A very warm welcome to this morning's session. My name is Kelly. I'm part of the venture investing team at SG Innovate. I lead our corporate engagement initiative, whose objective is to work with corporate leaders to share information and opportunities in emerging technologies, and ultimately to sort of bridge them to the deep tech startups in the ecosystem. So before we begin, it is perhaps useful for me to sort of frame today's discussion on scaling innovation through corporate startup collaboration. So in today's fast-moving, technology-driven economy, a large corporate knows that they need to keep pace with how emerging technology can enhance or impact their business. At the same time, startups adopting such technology seek to work with such corporates as their potential customers or even partners who can help them develop more relevant products for the market. On paper, it will appear to be a simple equation with mutual benefits, but the reality can be quite different. So today we have an exciting panel that includes representatives from both the corporate world as well as the startup ecosystem. I hope that we can have a candid discussion around what each speaker's experience has been working with the other side and how a better alignment can be achieved. So without further ado, I would like to invite our distinguished panelists, Dedrick, Oscar, Abhishek, and Philip, to introduce themselves and what they do. So maybe, Dedrick, if you can get the ball rolling.
Yes, for certain. Good morning to everyone, and thank you so much for organizing this. I actually believe that events like this are critical to the path of improving innovation and scaling innovation and collaborating across innovation. Maybe short introduction of my side. Working for Philips Health Tech, already for over 26 years nowadays. In the healthcare business, which is really the part of where the company has pivoted to in the last 2 decades, turning really Philips into a health tech company, with the ambition to improve the lives of 2.5 billion people in 2030. And how do we do that? How are we going to pursue that purpose? Well, of course, we all are, I think, aware and across the challenges that are out there. Growing populations, aging populations, and all kinds of resource constraints. Also very much, I think, abundantly clear in the past 12 months while the world is grappling with COVID-19. The key to that is, in fact, innovation. And from that perspective, we as a company, and I as a person also, I'm extraordinarily passionate to drive that in what we see, 4 distinct areas. We see, of course, we see clinical innovation, we see technological innovation, we see social innovation, how do we take care of each other, and we see business model innovation. And from our perspective, working and collaborating with partners in an as wide as open fashion is absolutely critical to probably address one of the larger challenges of our generation. And that is to build a healthcare system that is sustainable and at the end of the day also will take care of ourselves, because at the end of it, all of us will be a beneficiary of a good healthcare system.
Okay, thank you, Diederik. So perhaps we can get Oscar to go next.
Yeah, good morning all. Great to be here. Yeah, indeed. Also, AkzoNobel is a renowned company, been around the block already for 350 years in the industry, many decades already here in Singapore as well. And I fully agree with Diederik. It's all about innovation. We see it also as our purpose to be pioneering the world of opportunities to bring services to life. And you think about the walls in your homes, you think about steel constructions, marine vessels, and the like. And not only to protect them, but to beautify them. And I definitely encourage you, especially in these times of COVID, use color also to brighten up your lives for yourselves, your communities. We actively do that here in Singapore as well. And indeed, I want to stress the importance of innovation. So we have our labs across the region, a very important RD&I center here in Singapore as well, where many of your fellow countrymen are working and doing fantastic innovations here. We work together with the universities, A-Star program. Today, we're going to talk about the startup programs that we have running out. But we definitely have the ambition that in a very sustainable way, we can really brighten up the lives, protect the assets, and protect the environment.
That's great. How about Abhishek? Will I go next?
Yeah, good morning, everyone, and thanks for organizing these. I do agree with Oscar and Diederik that innovation is the key. And when we started out Movable AI 4 years back, I think that was something a lot of robotics companies were facing, the challenge of an autonomous navigation, and that gave birth to Movable AI. I think it was that mindset of innovating new things which we had in the beginning. And we've been operating for about 4 years, and we have worked with various different companies for providing the navigation solution for robotics. And I think during this tough time of COVID as well, robotics was the way is the way where if you are not able to be in contact with humans, but you can be in contact with the robots. So that's more safe. So I think that's more we have been doing for the past 4 years. Thanks.
Thank you, Abhishek. So last but not least, we have Philip.
Thanks, Kelly. Good morning, everyone. My name is Philip Wong. My background is I'm a doctor and a cardiologist working in the public health care sector. I'm also the founder and interim CEO of Web Biotech, which creates basically a cloud-based remote monitoring ECG ecosystem. I think the journey from innovation to commercialization is really very complex and very difficult. Have a lot of experiences to share. And I also think that partnerships with corporates are very important in the future ahead.
Okay, thank you, Philip. So to perhaps start us off, let's hear from the corporate's perspective first. So perhaps we'd like to understand a bit more what are your current interests, And how do you work with deep tech startups in these areas? What has sort of worked for you and what has not? Perhaps you can get Oscar to go ahead first.
Okay, so we indeed opened up very much our ecosystem to startups, and we started to do that through what we call Paint the Future initiative, which we started in 2019 to accelerate and also create more awareness among startups of the opportunities to work together with us. The first round was in 2019, and over 1,000 companies from more than 160 countries around the world actually sent in their first submissions to us, and we saw basically 4 or 5 categories of where indeed those applications came to us. So first of all, which also is a bit the topic of today about artificial intelligence, is around predictable performance. So how can we collect more data? How can we, of course, help customers to predict maintenance schedules, think about big oil rigs and the like. Smart application, it's already mentioned, robotics. How can we indeed apply coatings more efficiently, reduce waste? That's a very important topic as well. Circular solutions, really going back to sustainability, is an important category for us. And also we see opportunities that paint and coatings can not only protect assets against, for example, corrosion or UV sunlight and the like, but also enhance functionality. So we have, for example, now coatings that actually can clean the air. So in your house, you have less VOC exposure and the like. So actually, paint can also have much more functionality than what you would expect on the first sight. And life science, indeed, it's mentioned also by Diederik. Also, it can be a very much contributing to the life science. So this year, for example, we launched for the first time a completely bio-based paint into the industry as well. Now, we develop those ideas together with startups, and for us, Paint the Future, an annual event that we have last year done in Brazil. The coming year, we're going to do it in China, and I'm keen to also bring it to our region as well for the next edition, is where we create that platform for startups to collaborate in this area. And you see a couple of different needs that we identify amongst the startups from their side, from your side, and it's good to discuss this morning as well. On the one hand, like, what are you looking for? Are you looking for a way in the collaboration with us to accelerate, to speed up your development because you want access to RD&I resources? Is it about funding? Second need that we identify among startups, what they're looking for. Very much what we also find with startups is that through a multinational company like Philips, like where Diederik is working, or AkzoNobel, a worldwide paint and coatings company, is are you looking for scale, and that we can really help you to scale up your solution both fast and on a global platform. Or in sometimes startups we see they're more interested in integrating, and maybe that at some point really, let's say, become part of the AkzoNobel family. So there's a couple of ways, some couple of needs that we identify as we interact with startups, and through the Paint the Future initiative that is now getting copied into the industry, we create that platform so that more companies can find the way to us. Because we do find sometimes that startup companies are a bit struggling to find the way to knock on our door and to get access and to start the conversation with us.
Okay, thank you for sharing. So maybe we'll move on to Philip. No, sorry, to Philip Diederik to also share.
To Philips.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Philips, yes, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I think you talk about ecosystem building. And I believe that if we want to address the real challenge of innovation, we, all of us from that perspective, have a core role and maybe even a responsibility to indeed build and also maintain those ecosystems. And you do that at various levels. It can be in smaller settings, and we do that a lot. Here, for example, in what we call our Apex Center in Singapore, where we co-create, literally bringing various partners, participants out of our ecosystem together to really address heads-on certain challenges and come to rapid prototyping, rapid innovation trajectories, and really from that perspective, learning together. Another way of doing so is indeed working through our venturing program. Philips has a very active venturing program, and we have venturing teams. Even here in Singapore, we have a small venturing team where we, together with our partners in that ecosystem, continuously are on the lookout on how we can indeed support innovation. And that is not necessarily only based on funding. It can also be when it comes to expert insights. It can be about the scaling, using our global skill and other experiences that we have gained across the world. And last but not least, it can of course then also materialize into true partnerships and working together. We specifically here are, and that is a very broad area, we are very much focused on the digitalization of healthcare. Don't need to explain too much about that, but healthcare in itself is maybe one of the last areas in our society where the digitalization has not yet fully occurred. It's not even halfway, to be honest. And we believe that working together with startups, learning together with startups, and driving improvements together, not only in, let's say, the sophisticated parts of, for example, here Asia Pacific, but also and especially in areas of the world where access to care is still a challenge, is a critical undertaking.
Okay, thanks for sharing. So maybe let's hold that thought for a while. We'll come back to that later on how you guys, conduct your open innovation to reach out to startups. Let's also hear from like the startups perspective. So how do they then identify corporates to work with? Is it through such, innovation open call as well? What are some challenges that, they face when engaging corporates? So maybe Abhishek, you want to go first?
Sure. Okay. First of all, like when we deal with corporates, normally the introduction is either through if they have a need, so like if they have some open call or like they need some solution, we contact them, or most of them are linked through us, through our investors. Most of them were because I think they have a good partnership with our investors. They have linked us with them, and that's how we talk to them, because if they have a need and then they contact the investors and then investors tell us that this is what they there's a need over there, so we collaborate through that mainly. So the things which work for us is like one of the corporate even ended up investing in us, and the things which we learned was working with few corporates. I think as a startup, we have to be mindful of the way that these corporates should be willing to cooperate as well, and not just take the idea from you, because this was, I think, one of the, when we were quite new to the industry, we wanted to get some customers, and then one of those corporates actually had an in-house team. So as a startup, I think my advice would be to make sure that you do a proper background research about the corporates you work with. We do have, I mean, that's just one case, but like we did have a lot of good connections with corporate. Like as I mentioned, one of the corporates even went ahead and invested in us. So the good thing about having a corporate partnership is that it accelerates your growth tremendously. Like you can get, because then they can bring you to the industry much more quicker than you would do it yourself. So I think collaboration is important. I would just suggest that we do a lot of, I think one thing which we learned was we did a lot of background research before moving forward.
Okay, thanks Abhishek. How about you, Philip?
Maybe I just rewind a little bit and start with actually what are the unmet needs in the healthcare area, because I think this is the start of where innovation really begins. So if you look at the trends lately, like Dietrich mentioned, of course, digitalization is pretty important, and digitalization means, of course, wireless transfer of patient data and so on, right? So an ecosystem where patient data can be transmitted to a physician, I think is going to be very important healthcare need in the future. It bridges problems like accessibility, reactivity, and connectivity between healthcare provider and the patients. And even more so now during the COVID-19, you realize that any form of contact-free or contactless communication between physician and patient is going to be more critical. So myself in the hospital community, you can see actually a lot of tests, diagnostic tests, a lot of care will be shifting from hospital-based infrastructure into the community type of healthcare response. So in terms of innovation, I think a lot of innovation will move towards this direction. So for example, our system, the SPIDER ECG ecosystem, is very geared towards such care in the community in terms of diagnostics as well as remote monitoring. So it's a completely cloud-based controlled system. And we have, of course, deployed it widely in Singapore, but recently in the last year, we have expanded into Asia Pac as well as Europe. And being cloud-based control, I think this is really the way of the future. We can actually control how we utilize the system across broad geographic regions. So I think this is how we are trying to innovate. And of course, how we connect with the corporates will be very interesting. So of course, we've had a couple of years back when we were not so well developed. We had some relationship with Philips, who was interested in how we use a cloud-based system in Asia. Of course, at that time, we were a very small company. There were only 3 people in the company. Maybe a little bit of the difficulty with, with corporates is you are a very small company dealing with a huge corporate organization, and you don't know who exactly do you communicate with to share your innovation as well as your technology. So I think that is still one of the main barriers that startups will face. And if the corporates can, sort of have very easy ways where they can look at innovation and talk to startups, I think that would be a real great starting point for a relationship between the corporates and startups.
Thanks, Philip. So maybe we can throw that question to Oscar or Dedrick, like how would startups then be able to sort of identify who exactly they should then reach out to within the organization for such collaboration to happen?
Yeah, so to start off with, that's the beauty of why we created the Paint the Future platform. It's really an ecosystem, so that indeed we put some processes around it. As a big multinational company, I can fully appreciate it, because once you get involved and depending on the type of relationship you look with us, are you looking for example, a sourcing agreement, a research agreement? Obviously, you talk about different stakeholders that you're going to deal with. Are you going to talk with the RD&I people within AkzoNobel? Or are you going to talk with marketing people? Business development managers and the like. Now, what we do via the Paint the Future initiative is that through that eco-center, we talk about what are the promising ideas that we truly going to embrace, so that you know that when you are coming out of that Paint the Future cycle, that you will indeed get the support that you deserve. Then we put case managers on it, so that indeed that whole process is made easy for you. And that case manager will make sure that the complexity of the multinational at the other end is being taken care for. See it as a kind of key account manager that guides you through that entire process. So yes, that's definitely a need I fully understand.
Yeah, I can only echo that. So on one side, indeed, get to know the corporate. Get really to that point where you really understand where I think their priorities lie, understand their purpose. And if you then, for example, come to the area of Philips, of the digitalization of healthcare, indeed, it is about establishing a case manager or a certain amount of account management here, because those corporates are indeed very, very large. And it is easy to get lost at a certain point in time in that phase. For that perspective, we very purposely participate also in events. Slingshot 2020 had this global innovation competition to make known what we are interested in. We partner up also here, not only with SG Innovate, but also with EDBI and SG Enterprise and all kinds of participants in that ecosystem to make, I think, well known what the areas are that we believe we can also strengthen the startup proposition and accelerate, I would say, their access to market or access to capital or access to knowledge. And by establishing that base understanding, indeed prevent of I would say both parties getting lost in the process.
Thank you for sharing. So maybe also like a follow-up from that question, right? So I think from a startup perspective, how would you then advise other startups as well to sort of demonstrate value and gain support and trust to push through such collaborations with corporates that you have worked with?
Okay, so yeah, so as a startup, I think one of the key advices, like to demonstrate the value, is what we do is like we really sit down with the corporates, and I think we do understand what is their need, what is their goal as well. Because if if their goal and our goal doesn't align, I think then we should like work towards aligning the goals. Because in from our experience, I think one of the key few things which we noticed was the the corporates are very like very organized, as in like they'll have a business unit, they'll have a technical team, they'll have different teams. And then when you go to the business unit on a higher level, might be talking about like this is what they need. But when you go deep into the technical team, like when you start working with the technical team, that is where you want to work together. Because at the end of the day, when you work with a corporate, you are working with their technical team. Of course, the business unit gives you the plan, the action, but at the end of like when you work with the technical team, that is where your more demonstration value would come. So I think your value should be that when you're working with the corporate team, I think you should have a good connection with the business unit as well as with the technical team as well. I mean, so I think from our experience, it would be that the technical team is they're in line with what exactly your alignment will be. Because normally when you go to a corporate, they will be like the first interface will be a business unit, and then when you talk to the business unit, yes, your goals are aligned. And when you go to the technical unit, there are some things there's some challenges which you face. So I think that is where our focus was more on like aligning the goals along with both business units and the technical team.
Philip, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, sure. So I think to simply put it, I think there are two phases. One, first phase is basically a proof of concept. So for example, for Spider, what we are trying to show is that we could demonstrate that, you know, individuals across 20 countries could send the data into a consolidated cloud server from anywhere, any time zone, and we could read the system well, and of course give answers directly back to these patients who sometimes were thousands of miles away. I think proof of concept is one thing. We also tried to show that we could consolidate a very good database. We now have about 17,000 patients in our database coming across 20 countries or so. The next step, I think, is very crucial, which is a proof of value. I think this is basically fundamentally to show that your business model is effective, right? So how you provide, you know, your solution across different economies and so on is going to be very crucial, I think, in the next phase. So in our case, of course, our business model is very cloud-based, you know, sort of take on how we do transactions with between hospitals and you know, vendors and so on. So we use a completely digital system as a business model. This is evolving, of course, as time change. But I think having initial good focus on what is your concept of your whole innovation, followed by how you can show a business model value of your solution, is going to be the initial blip that will put you on the spot of a corporate.
Thank you.
If I can build on that, Kelly, so I think it's a very good point he's making. And I would say add to that, think about what kind of partnership you're looking for. Diederik mentioned it as well. So I'll give you an example of the winner of the Paint the Future Global Startup Challenge in 2019, which was Alucha Recycling Technologies. And with them, we entered into a sourcing agreement. So normally one of the minerals that we use to produce paint is calcium carbonate. And normally that's being mined, which of course is not the most sustainable way to do that. And actually this company came up with a protocol and a technology to turn paper sludge, so used paper, and really distract calcium carbonate from the paper, a mineral that we now can use into our paints to make more sustainable paints in this more circular economy approach. Now, so with them, we help them to set up the funding and beyond so that they now in a way become a supplier of calcium carbonate. And we're now into a pilot phase with Sassenheim to launch a first paint product using their calcium carbonate. So with them, we have a sourcing agreement, but maybe you look for a different, a joint development agreement or a license agreement. So yes, proof of concept, absolutely, but also think about what kind of relationship and partnership you're looking for so that we can really help each other in a win-win situation there.
Thanks. Diederik, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, maybe just an acknowledgement. Yes, absolutely proof of concept. I would also acknowledge that I in general find it more challenging, I would say, to work with through early startups. So when they are coming in for seed funding, and well, if you are already looking at a Series B funding or a Series C funding round, and indeed that proof of concept is much clearer. That is for us an easier proposition to evaluate. So there's a certain part of the life cycle of the startup where it still is very challenging for us also to collaborate with.
So do you guys actually have different programs, maybe to engage different stages of startup?
We in fact do it all. So we indeed truly have a venturing program that will not shy away from taking any position from that perspective. It is a very, I would say, it is not a digital black and white business proposition. There's a thorough internal debate required before we are taking a position. But given the need to innovate, given that open innovation perspective that we have, given that we also believe that this, especially in Asia Pacific, is a absolute core region, and I would like to emphasize that. I think it was also a remark in one of the questions that passed by. It's not only about Singapore; it is a core region for development. We will look at it all.
Okay. How about Oscar? You know, for your Paint the Future challenge, you know, do you guys work with any stages of startup? Is it open to all the startup over the world? Yeah.
Absolutely. So the first one, which we run in 2019, also had participants from 160 countries. More than 1,100 companies participated. We just did it during COVID time, no less, in a more virtual setup in Brazil. And this year in March, we're going to do it in China. And I'm keen to also have it here in APAC region as well. So yeah, no, it's absolutely a global activity. And what we tend to see is 6 types of agreements that we tend to end up with. So it can be a research agreement where more fundamental research is required to go from the initial idea into more, let's say, so how can we really bring this to life? The sourcing agreement, I gave you the example of Alucha Recycling just now, can be a business collaboration agreement, a joint development agreement, where indeed we help through that stage of coming up with the first value proposition there, the first viable project, or a license agreement if you're already further down the life cycle of your development. And indeed, it can take different types, shapes and forms. If we do funding, usually you can expect there will be a type of exclusivity involved. And we say, hey, we want to be the first 3 years. We want to be the first partners with you before you open it up to other partners that you work with. So that's the type of arrangements. And I fully agree with Diederik. You look at it from a case-to-case basis. Where is the startup in the development stage? What kind of partnership we're looking for? There's not a black and white there.
I think also sort of building on that, I think we have a question coming in from the audience. So they ask, how do you actually balance internal innovation versus open innovation?
Do you want to do that first, Diederik?
Yeah, in fact, very clear. It's a very interesting question, actually. I don't think we are purposely going after a balance at all. What Philips decided already decades ago, and in fact, our research campuses, we used to have indeed these very large Philips research campuses, which were kind of closed facilities where Philips R&D would do their innovation work from through also basic research and development. And out of that, many innovations of the past that are known across the world are coming out of that type of Philips innovation. Think about the CD or the music cassette. Nowadays, those research campuses are fully open. And then the prioritization is actually set on the basis of what we call the quadruple aim in healthcare. So if you look at the larger challenges in healthcare, they are about resources constraints, they are about cost. And also, in fact, what Dr. Philip Wong was saying about a movement towards measuring outcomes, not necessarily, for example, in the hospital, but also in the home. And what we do is we look at innovation to the lens of the quadruple aim of value-based healthcare. And to simplify that, the quadruple aim is an equation where we look at if innovation is going to contribute at, let's say, better patient experience or better staff experience or better clinical and health outcomes. And then below the line is, of course, the cost element. And if you put that equation in place, that in fact is the equation of value. And therefore, whenever we look at any terms of innovation, internal, external, we look in fact at how it would contribute at the value generation in any healthcare setting. And to use an example in place, COVID-19 truly accelerated digital healthcare. Had a virtual setting between patient and doctor. Well, maybe it was already started beforehand. Of course, last year, suddenly it became common ground because everybody was working from home. Everybody actually had limitations in transport. And in fact, to limit the exposure to COVID-19, the reduction of mobility in society was a core goal of all the measurements put in place by various governments. Well, that virtual setting, that acceleration is, we believe, a very clear step towards creating value-based healthcare systems, because we believe that those virtual settings are actually going to contribute to better patient experience, better staff experience, at the end of the day also better outcomes at lower cost.
Yeah, same for us. We don't make a choice for either in or outside R&D. If anything, we've got the highest percentage of RD&I spent in the industry, and we are definitely committed to continue to do so. Any industry research or business research that you do, you find there is a level of correlation there between how much RD&I spend as a company do you have versus how does your profitable, sustainable future of that company. So we don't believe in our DNA that completely outsourcing or not paying any attention whatsoever to RD&I is viable at all. However, just like what Philips has done, opening up, we do believe that will definitely create a win-win situation. So if for internal research, we continue with what we do is our stage gate process. So, and that's divided through very fundamental research. The backbone of paint is resin. Resin technology, we continue to have very bespoke, dedicated research facilities where we work on technologies, coating technologies that will hopefully come to market maybe in 10 years from now. These are very fundamental research that we continue to do. And as of course you go into shorter timelines, you go into applications and to more specific paint technologies that we use. Now, just like what Diederik was explaining for Philips, if we look at ways and types of innovations, then it's of course not limited to the paint itself. It's limited. It's definitely looking at the application process. It's look at the sustainability element of it. It's looking at the functionality of paint, what it can provide. It can be now heat reduction. For example, if you now have more smarter paints in your home and you have, for example, lamps, etc., they will make sure that you get more light out of the whole system. If you have the paints of AkzoNobel used on top of it, then we get more light efficiency in your house. I already talked about clean air, that actually the paint there's an active component in our paints that can actually purify the air, elements like that. So these are all kind of applications that are now broadening our scope, the robot application of paint, but definitely also the AI part. So what we do a lot now is that, for example, we take care of the maintenance of oil rigs, so that you can take a picture of an oil rig using drone technology and use an artificial intelligence to assess the level of damage, whether or not maintenance is required, and actually we can optimize maintenance cycles so that indeed we can save cost and also save the environment in the process. Now that's the type of innovation that is not coming out of our classical RD&I centers that we have today, but that's definitely something where we do appreciate that startup companies can bring a lot to the party. And we've seen definitely also during COVID that the sales that we have realized this last year, the percentage of which is related to digital initiatives has increased from 4% at the beginning of the year to 20% at the end of 2020. So we also see very much a rise in digital solutions, helping with our partners, the painters, the applicators and the like, to work through a more digital way as well. And again, that's something where we do recognize that we can really have a win-win relationship with external startup companies.
So maybe now I'll have like sort of a two-part question, and this is sort of coming up from the audience as well. So I think maybe we'll get the startups to sort of answer it first. So, you know, like a lot of your products that you guys do, there are also a lot of competing innovation in the market as well. So how then you guys, you know, differentiate yourself in front of the corporate so that corporate will be, you know, willing to, you know, give you guys a chance to maybe do even a POC with you guys?
You go first, Diederik?
No, maybe.
This from the startup company.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Yeah. So maybe Abhishek or Philip want to go first?
Yeah, okay. So I think one of the major differentiating factor, like there are two phases to it. So when we approach corporate, so the first is when we are in the very startup, like when we are just the beginning of our startup, maybe like within a year, where our product is not mature, we do not have that many use cases, and we are still working on it. And then I think what we really differentiate ourselves is the team. Like the team has the capability to do it. So what we do in the first year is we sell the team, and what we have worked previously as founders and the small team which we have, because during the first year you would have a team of about only 3 to 4 people in a startup, and once you have funding then you have 15 to 20 people. But I think when you are a 3 to 4 member, I think what you really need to what we really showed is the strength of a team, and what as a founder and the few members which with the first hires are very important in that case. And that's what we sell to the corporate, that like this is a team which is dedicated, this is a team which you can deliver, and this is a team which can work on it. Then when we have few use cases, and then when we approach a corporate, then we show what our winning cases were, what we worked with them, how much time we took to deliver to them. So in that case, we show our results, what we have worked on prior to that. I think that helps us get more confidence from the corporates, like yes, they have delivered to previous companies, so they would be able to deliver to us. And I think that has always worked in our favor previously.
So from a startup point of view, I think startups are mostly working in a vertical silo in a very specific area of focus, whereas the corporates will be very large areas, multiple silos they are working on at any one time. For example, our space is actually the remote ECG monitoring space, a very specific part of a vertical ecosystem that works within the entire ecosystem of a very large corporate. So I think the first thing, how to approach this thing is to see whether there's any compatibility with existing systems. So for example, Philips has very large ecosystems in multiple areas in our hospital. And we want to identify, first thing first is the ECG part of it. And our initial work with Philips was whether our data could be compatible with their backholding data system. So simple things like this in terms of the proof of concept are very critical to show the corporate that your system can be eventually somehow integrated into their system. So I think this puts a little bit of effort on the startups part, because it's not easy. I can tell you it's very difficult because data is privatized. You want to get your data synced with the corporate's database. It's difficult, but I think that's a very clear starting part to show that there is compatibility as well as the potential for integration of your system into the corporate system that will, I think, perhaps put a start point to your collaborations.
And perhaps directed to the corporate panelists, so how do you then decide among all this similar innovation, like which one would you want to collaborate with?
Yeah, maybe. So obviously there's a well-defined process. If you're in a big company, then there's a process for everything. We have, I think Oscar referred to it as stage gating internally. Well, also a certain stage gating when we look at our innovation portfolio in relation to our venturing program. But besides that, I think the critical factor, people was mentioned, collaboration. I think it's about commonality. And at the end of the day, if two teams, the startup team and the corporate team, basically have a common view of the challenge at hand and a common purpose, basically to address that, then I think that is significantly increasing the chances for a fruitful collaboration. And that's also much needed, because of course you will go up and down, you will go up and down, you will go up and down. But as long as that commonality of purpose is in place, I think there's real grounds to work from.
Okay, thanks. Oscar, do you have anything to add? Sorry, you're muted.
So if from my side, I would say that if you have a look at a bit at the, if you want to simplify it, then I would say you'd look at two axes. One thing is the attractiveness versus the feasibility of making it into a win-win relationship. And if you look at attractiveness, it goes also to the elements Diederik mentions, like, is it aligned in the focus and the purpose that you want to have? For example, in our case, sustainability is a very important element that we look at. And I gave you the example there of using, let's say, the paper sludge as a really new source of materials, and you look at the alignment that you have in terms of focus, and on the other hand, you look at, is this feasible? And then it goes down definitely to people. I think Abhishek's point is absolutely true. I think the credibility of the startup company really goes down to how capable do we assess the people to be in that startup company, how committed are they, and then of course also in terms of feasibility and what kind of partnership do we have. Can we add value as well to this relationship? Is it truly a win-win situation? And of course we recognize that for you, if you as a startup company, yeah, indeed you go through that the seeding phase, phase A, B, and C of your financing. We need to add value quickly, also for you, to indeed make sure that this is a viable proposition. So I would say, to simplify the process, the attractiveness, the alignment versus the feasibility and the ability to quickly add value in that relationship.
I think also maybe building on this, because there's so many competitors to a similar product, do the corporates also then, try to work with different startups to sort of like benchmark them to kind of sort of make the decision eventually who they want to work with?
Diederik, you want to go first?
Yeah, so yes, there is indeed there's a thorough evaluation process ongoing, and clearly what we do is we continuously look at the we have a funnel of startup opportunities, possibilities, collaboration that we maintain, we evaluate, we grow, amongst others by outreach and ecosystem related programs. And then of course we thoroughly in a cadence review how we are actually delivering on that value creation that Oscar was referring to versus plan. And that is, of course, a very important process, so that it's not only about the initial intent, but then also indeed following through. And that is on mutual side. It is not only towards the startup, but also very much, and I think that is at least as challenging, towards the big corporate. Are we indeed delivering to this startup that we are now a part of, that we have partnered with? Are we delivering what we have committed to accelerate that value creation?
Yeah, same here. So you can expect definitely that you have to go through the process of going. You have set yourself milestones with the company. And I think that's equally important for the startups themselves. I think the funding, the survival is critical as well. And therefore you have, but also on our side as a corporate side, so you have this periodic evaluations where you go through the milestones that have been agreed. Is there a need? Is there deviation? The gap closing actions required from either side? So yeah, at the end of the day, it's a business, of course, and it's managed accordingly.
Okay, maybe back to the startups. So given what you know today, based on your interaction with various corporates through the years, what would you have done differently when you first started out?
Okay, so when we started out, I think, as I mentioned, our product was still maturing. We were still talking to a lot of different companies of what their needs are. And when we started working with some corporates, I think we spend a lot of time, if their demands would change over time, like as in like within 15 days, or can you do that? Can you do? So we ended up doing more than what we agreed on, because I think that's the first initial contracts you don't want. You feel that you don't want to lose them if they think so. It may we ended up doing much more than what was expected us of doing. I think that is something which we would have tried to think, but at that time, the thinking was also that maybe this is what it is needed in the market, because we do have our own innovation, but what if that innovation is not required in the market? So we also want to know from the customer's feedback that is this something what you need, or do you need want us to fine tune that as well? So I think one of the things which you could have done differently is to take feedback from a lot more different companies rather than on just few companies, and then trying to do more work for them rather than getting a common ground for all of those common requirements. I think that is something which you might have done differently.
Philip?
I think from my point of view, across the years, have had multiple rejections from many corporates over the time. But I would say that don't take this at heart. I think believe in your own innovation. A lot of the so-called comments or criticisms that are made by the corporates are very real, because they are in the real business world. I think they understand, the healthcare value proposition very well. Otherwise, they won't be where they are. So that kind of advice, I think, is very key for a startup, because often startups are so focused on the innovation, they think that the innovation is the best in the world, but in fact, it cannot apply to the current economic situation or the current healthcare situation. So take what the corporates say as advice rather than, don't take it as a rejection. And I think the relationship can always come back again at another time when your company is a little bit more mature or so on. So I think in the process of innovation is a very rocky road, but for startups, I think the reward at the end is to see, for example, the Spider unit is now used in 20 countries across the world. I started it as a simple device 10 years ago, but to see it apply to healthcare across the world, I think is a great reward for a very tiny startup with one person 10 years ago. Now we have 10 people in the company. It's still growing, but that reward is something we always look forward to.
Thank you for sharing. So I noticed that we're coming to the end of the session. Perhaps one last question before we end this panel. So how has COVID-19 affected the way you work with the other party? So like corporates with startups and the startup with corporates. Anyone want to go first?
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Philip.
Sorry. So we end up with a lot of Zoom meetings like this, and I think this is the way that we will go ahead with live post-COVID-19. But the actual collaborations, I think, require a face-to-face meeting. I think, of course, the initial discussions and so on can be across Zoom, but when we really get down to collaborations, the teams have to meet. So this is where I think, in the future, any face-to-face meeting would be very critical for collaborations.
Yes, if I go second, it's a bit of double. So on the one hand, of course, and I couldn't agree more. And now when I start to go back 50% of my time to the office, you have the interaction, you have the coffee chit chat that you otherwise don't have. And if you have virtual calls, they tend to be very focused, very purposeful. We have a virtual meeting about a certain topic, and we have face to face, you have much more free flowing ideas, information, etc. So yes, I'm really looking forward to a bit more back to normal. Having said that, I'm positively impressed that in this COVID period, our bond between colleagues, but also with customers, if anything, has enhanced and deepened. So we now have virtual calls with our management team where we specifically don't talk about business. We talk about each other's lives. We talk about the fact that a parent is ill and we cannot visit them in the hospital. It's more than a year that I've been able to see my children as well. And the bonding between each other has become more intense. You do more an effort to reach out to customers. We opened our kitchens and canteens to provide food. In countries like India and Pakistan and stuff like that. So the bonding with our customers has been huge. And also the painters, we work with 80,000 painters in the region. We gave them health insurance, health advice, etc. So in a way, it also COVID has brought the best out of all of us. I'm sure we're not the only company in that respect. And we see, if anything, the engagement, both internal and with our business partners outside, has increased. And for the startups, from a business point of view, the digitalization has accelerated. So there's definitely, although I would have liked to see it in a different way, there is some silver lining.
Yeah, if I can build on that, Oscar, I also see indeed a silver lining in terms of the unprecedented focus on healthcare. Across the world, healthcare suddenly took center stage, and it was very clear that we need to, on a global basis, take steps to improve our healthcare systems. And as already referred to, I think from that perspective, COVID-19, extraordinary, significant impact on people's lives. But at the same time also a moment of acceleration of innovation, my world drastically changed. I used to be on an airplane every week of the year, traveling throughout Asia Pacific. I've been now at home for months at a time. There's from that perspective also some silver lining, I can assure you, and indeed. The bonding, the collaboration is continuing, and in fact we are getting better at also indeed having that almost social interaction in a virtual setting. Going back to innovation, I like the part what Dr. Philip Wong was saying. It's hard. It's not easy to innovate. It's a tough journey. But then maybe to close, it was Thomas Edison that said, I have actually not failed. I have just found 10,000 ways that won't work. And that's how he continued on.
Yeah. So to add on, I think it was indeed a silver lining for us, because the way we used to operate before COVID was we used to go to the customer side, deploy our software solutions onto their robots, and that would take about 1 to 2 months of integration efforts. And now when COVID happened and the travel restrictions were in place, then it was all of a sudden like, how do we work with it? Like if we don't go over there, they might just, because we had customers overseas, and then they might just work with the local vendors or someone if we are not able to provide. But I think that the corporates were quite collaborative in the mindset. They're like, look, if you cannot do it, can you do it remotely? And that is where we changed how our business was operating from going to the customer side, doing the deployment, taking one month's time to making a product which can be deployed within few days and we can deploy it remotely. And then I think it took us about 6 months to develop that product, but after that, I think we have deployed in few of those overseas without even going over there, and I think the customers are happy with it. So I think that COVID did bring in a lot of innovation, because what we were planning to do in 2021, 2022 of getting this software up and running and which can be remotely deployable was done in 2020, and we had to. The downside is for those 6 months we didn't have much customers, but the good thing is that the product is much more is ready much earlier than what we were expecting it to be. So in a way that now we are fully open for going anywhere in the world without going there in person. So that helped us. I think COVID, and I think the corporates were quite cooperative in that aspect, that they understood the situation and for everyone.
Thank you for everyone for sharing, Deirdre, Oscar, Abhishek, and Philip, for your time and generous sharing of your viewpoints and perspective. Also, thank you to our audience for joining us this morning. So I'll pass the time on to Wei Ming now.
So sorry. Thank you, Kelly. Great points brought up throughout the discussion. I'm sure that many of our audience have lots to take home today. Unfortunately, due to the time, we did not have enough time to address all the questions that has been raised up in the Q&A tab today. However, for our friends and startups, I hope that today you have learned more on how effective collaborations can be established, and also for our corporate friends to understand more on how innovations can actually be a game changer within the organization. That being said, I would like to represent SG Innovate to thank all the attendees who have stayed with us till now. And I would like to say a big thank you to all our wonderful speakers, Deirdre, Oscar, Abhishek, and last but not least, Philip, for all the wonderful insights and sharing for today's webinar. For all the attendees, do keep a lookout for our post-event mail, which will contain a recording of today's session. And do reach out to us at events@sginnovate.com if you would like to connect with any of our speakers or just to have a chat with us for collaboration opportunities. Do also remember to give us your post-event feedback when you exit the webinar or through the post-event mail as well. With that, this is Wei Min signing out from this webinar. Hope that everyone will have a great day ahead.